I was numb. You're like, wow, it's actually here. And then days after days, and I would keep the books on my desk for a little while and just be like, look at it, you did it. You wrote this book, you thumb through it, looks like a legitimate book. I couldn't believe it. Here it is. And I remember one of my favorite things from that moment was we were sitting around the dinner table. And my daughter, she says to me, she goes, and she was younger at the time, so she's probably, 7 or 8. And she goes, Mom, I can do anything. And I said, sure, honey, you can do anything. But, why are you saying that? Why is that coming up? And she goes, well, you said you could write a book and you did it. So if you can write a book, that means that I can do things too. And I was like, again, worth it. Whether anybody ever reads my book, for me to get the book and for my kids to see it, and for them to feel like that meant that they could accomplish something in their life. My husband and I always have those conversations. If we can be branches of a tree for our kids to swing on, if we can be, if they can take our ceiling and make it their floor, then we've done a good job. And I think that if storytelling is doing that for my kids, I'm grateful. But that was definitely a big part of when I got my books and I looked at them and I looked at the covers, and I'm just so proud of them. I really am. I can't wait for book 3 to be done and for me to be able to see the whole collection sitting together on my bookshelf with, all 3 titles and all 3 characters.
Okay, when we hit the button, it says recording in progress. And here we are. It's Living the Next Chapter. Another great guest on the show, now a new podcaster, which we'll get into. Angela Hughes is with me today, and we're going to be talking about her journey, her story, and who she is, and all that great stuff to come here on Living the Next Chapter. Angela, congratulations on your new podcast, and
Thank
welcome
you so
to
much.
Living the Next Chapter. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Okay, so you made me happy just by, at the beginning here before we record, giving me the news on a new podcast that I get to fall in love with. Tell us about your new show and more about it. Let's talk about that right at the beginning.
Well, I have a friend of mine, Stephanie Cotta, who is also a fantasy author, and myself started a podcast called The Ink Mages. And our podcast focuses on storycraft, fantasy, all things imaginative, fun, and especially nerdy. We kind of pride ourselves on being fantasy super nerds as much as we love the genre. We also enjoy writing that genre and talking about that genre. We talk about anything from Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, to our own stories. And so we're really excited. We talk, she lives in Oregon, I live in Texas, and we already talk about these things just over a Zoom call. And so we thought, why not start a podcast where we can just talk and banter about these things together and people can join in the fun. So we'll also be interviewing other fantasy fiction authors.
Oh, I have a bunch that would love to come on your show, just so you know. So if you're looking for people, I got a list. So I got some amazing guests that have been on this show, and super amazing people as well. Funny, exciting, mysterious, everything, whole mix. So let me know if you need any help, because I got guests for you. That's great.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. That's huge. There's, like we talked about before we record, many people talk about starting a show. Many people talk about writing a book. It's talking and planning, right? But then it's just in one moment in time where you start writing down your thoughts, you hit the microphone, and just make it happen. So you've done both, which is amazing.
Yes. Well, we just thought, what could it hurt? Let's just start recording and see what happens. We had a few questions we already had lined up, and we just discussed, and it turned out to be a lot easier than our minds made it to be. We thought it would be this huge obstacle, that would be a huge mountain that we'd have to climb to try to figure out. And it really just fell into place once we hit the record button, and everything else just panned out much, much easier than we ever thought it would be.
There you go. So if you're listening as an author and you're thinking, should I have a podcast? What a great way to promote your book too. Like, you can put that into each episode. You can talk about each other's stuff, promote what you're doing, take people behind the scenes of writing, share, read from your book. Like, there's so many things you could do, right, in a podcast. So if there's an author listening and they haven't thought about a podcast to complement their book, what would you say to them?
I would say don't hesitate. I think we always wonder if we are going to have enough information to say. It's the same thing when we start writing our books. Are we going to have enough words to fill a page? And the truth is, once you just start, it's amazing how much there is inside you to say. And if you've already written a book, then you do have something to say. You have characters to explore. You have other authors that are interested in talking to you, because there's nothing better than talking to a fellow author in the genre that you're writing in and getting to talk about all of the things you experience as a writer, because nobody knows it better than another writer. And so there really is so much at your fingertips, things that you know that you're taking for granted that other people probably would love to hear about.
So there's 3 people you should consider for your guests on your podcast. Okay. 3 types of people. Number 1 would be somebody who's further along the path than you are as an author. Somebody you look up to. Like, yes. if I could have time in their calendar, that would make my day. Somebody I admire, they're my inspiration. Shoot for the fence, reach out, talk to them, give them an invite. You never know. They might say yes. So that's great. Somebody you look to, somebody who is like you would be person number 2. Someone who's writing, someone who's in your genre, someone that is kind of an equal, I guess. Right? That you would say they're kind of at the same stage that I'm at. But then the 3rd person is the person behind you who hasn't started, who is maybe struggling. Bring them on and encourage them through your podcast and give them a voice to share their journey. So someone up in front of you, someone beside you, and someone behind you. Build up that community, one guest at a time, and you'll see your podcast grow. Community grow, you're going to grow as a person, which is amazing. So, and that's going to filter right back into your writing. So the next thing you write are going to be from that combined audience, community, the things you learn from other people. It's going to make your writing better as well.
Wow, I like that. It's great advice. I was writing it down as you were.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk author journey. Let's talk about that. Where did all this start for you, Angela? Take me back to the moments before you were an author and kind of how this all developed for you to put pen to paper and start writing a story.
Well, I was not one of those people that all of my life aspired to be a great author or a writer. I actually have been very creative my whole life. I've been a painter and an artist and an illustrator and all of these things. I loved storytelling. In fact, I love to tell the story about when I was a kid, because I was very hyperactive and had a lot of energy. And one of the things I loved to do that my mom loved particularly was I loved to listen to music. And, when I was a kid, we had record players. So I had a E.T. soundtrack and an Indiana Jones soundtrack. Ooh. And I would put those soundtracks on our record player, put my big old 80s headphones on. And my brain, my imagination, I would sit there for hours listening to both sides of the record, because we had to flip the record over for part 2. Yes. And my imagination would just roll in Storyland, and I could stay in Storyland for ages. But still growing up, I never put together that my love for stories had anything to do with a talent to write. For some reason, I had put in the category of writer someone who wasn't like me. I was too free-spirited, not academic enough to be a writer. So I really never considered myself someone who could write a book, though I loved movies. I loved reading. My husband calls me the Great Devourer, because you put books in front of me and I will read them. And I will read them quickly, because I enjoy being deep in a story. But it wasn't until about 4.5 years ago, actually probably 5 years ago now, this story started filling my brain. It was almost like an encounter. It was like the story just came to me and it would not let me go. I would daydream all day about this story. I would lay my head down on my pillow at night and it would not stop. And it was so distracting that I kept telling my husband, man, I wish I knew someone who could write this story. because it's a really great story. And I wish I knew someone who could. And it's funny because I'd taken professional writing classes and enjoyed them. I'm not terrible at, grammar and writing, but it still wasn't something I thought I was qualified to do. So here I was searching. I'm like, maybe someday I'll meet someone who wants to be a ghostwriter and write my story. And then one day it dawned on me. It was me that I needed to be brave enough. I did not feel like I had the ability to write a story, to fill a novel, let alone the fact that the story was such a huge story that it was going to fill up 3 novels. And, but, I just decided, because I get this bug sometimes in me where I'm like, if I have a gift and I bury it, that's something lost. And it's better to try and fail and release that gift than to, just let it go to the wayside. And I thought, I've got the story. I'm going to try. But I was still really afraid. And I remember the pivotal moment for me. I had told my husband I wanted to write the story, but I was afraid to tell anyone else because I felt too pretentious. I thought people would think I was, loony and for wanting to write a book because I'd never done that before. Yeah. And I found I was on a trip with a group of friends to Northern Ireland. And I used to live in Ireland. So Ireland's got a lot of value to me as far as just me personally. I've always loved the history of England, Ireland, and Scotland. That's part of all that history has always very much fascinated me. So here I was in Northern Ireland, and I was actually standing on a hill that we had hiked up to the top of that had a stone that was the actual stone that inspired C.S. Lewis to write about the stone table in the Chronicles of Narnia.
Wow.
So this is my backdrop, and I'm looking at the scenery of Ireland. And as I'm looking out, a friend of mine, and again, I had told no one, he comes over, wraps his arm around me and says, it's time to write that book. The mantle's on you and you need to do it. And I went, okay, if I ever needed confirmation that I needed to write a book, this is the moment. So I got home and I literally started writing and didn't stop. I just believed that, you can't learn to play a violin if you never pick one up, if you never start playing, if you never put your fingers to the strings. Right. And I just thought, how do I know if I can't do this? Some people can learn to play the violin really quickly. And I just decided to start, and it was amazing what began to flow out of me as I was writing. And then what I discovered as a writer, it was kind of this original design. Like, I was meant to do this my whole life and never knew it until, here I am, in my 40s. Discovering this talent that is probably the favorite thing I've ever done in my life. And writing that first novel changed my life entirely. So for just writing it for that reason alone was worth it, because it really connected to me, who I was as a child, who I feel like I've always been what I've always meant to do, what I've always meant to offer the world. And I did finish that book. And then I finished a second book. And then now I've just completed the 3rd book. It is on its way to be edited here soon. So, and I'm not going to stop. Now more stories are continuing to fill my mind, and I'm an author now.
Wow. Anyone listening to that goes, well, Angela has passion. Let's just qualify that right from the beginning, that Angela has passion for what she does. It just exudes from you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that finds its way onto the page as well. What was hard for you, though, when you don't see yourself as an author, wanting to give this project to someone else to do? What was hard for you in the beginning stages to come to terms with the fact that you're the author and you need to make this work?
I had to fight a lot of voices in my head at the beginning. There were so many voices as I'm trying to write and just imagine this world I'm creating that would say, who do you think you are? What are you doing? This is, terrible. Lot of doubt, and one of the things that helped me is I would write something and I would make my husband listen. I just say, I'm going to read you what I wrote and I want to know what you think. Like, be really honest with me. And he was flabbergasted when I started reading to him. He's like, wow, actually are writing something I'm interested in. And he's not, not to say that I didn't have the talent, but he wasn't even into fantasy genre. Like he's more into, military, mafia. Those are the kind of stories he likes to read. And he was like, this is great. But I think what really helped me, for one, I pushed through those voices, all of those voices that told me I was pretentious and I had no business doing what I was doing. It was funny how loud those voices were and how much I had to push through them. But really what shifted for me, and this is what I always like to tell people, I said, be willing to invest in yourself. I knew I had a lot to learn. I knew that I was a novice and that I was only just starting. And so one of the things that I chose to do was I hired a writing coach to review my first 3 chapters that I had written. And it was only meant to just be a review where I sent him my 3 chapters and then he emailed me back all of his critiques. So I hired him and he read my chapters and he emailed me and said, I've got to talk to you in person. And he's like, can you do a Zoom call with me? He's like, I'm not going to charge you. I just want to talk to you. And I was like, sure, this is great. And to me, that was already kind of exciting. Like this person who was an author, a fantasy author, wanted to have a Zoom call with me. And one of the first things he said before he started ripping apart my story was, wow, you are a fantastic storyteller. Don't stop. Thanks. And those words, you're a fantastic storyteller, so stuck in my brain. And it was kind of the words that could speak over the top of all of the doubt as I was writing. If somebody who's already a successful fantasy author says, I'm a fantastic storyteller, then I'm going to own that. And it really helped me press through. And I think the other thing that helped me was starting to join other writer communities where people were, like you said, all stages of writing, some who were still hoping to write, some who had written books and had lines of books on the bookshelves, and some who were right where I was at. Yeah. And that did everything for me, because now I was in a community that was kind of pulsing and pushing me into finishing my book. And I ended up leading a writers group by the end of my first book, even in my own community, and meeting a lot of other authors that way as well.
It's exciting. Now, the one thing that's interesting, and I like to flip this around on my guests, because my guests come on, they talk about people that have inspired them and helped them in their journey and that great feedback. And how much do they look up to these people and admire them as authors? That you now are that same person to someone else who looks up to you and goes, I can't believe Angela wants to talk to me. I can't believe Angela wants me on her podcast. I can't believe Angela wants to meet me for a Zoom meeting. Now it's flipped. You're that person for someone else now. What does that mean to you? What does that responsibility feel like for you, that as a published author with 3 books now, that people admire and look up to you as an example for their writing career? How does that make you feel?
I mean, I think it's kind of just like you said, it's a responsibility. Yeah. And I think it's an important responsibility, because where would I have been? And again, I bring it back to the fact that this is something that was important for me to discover. It was important for me to discover that I had a gift and a calling, really, to write stories. Mm-hmm. And I needed other people to be willing to coach me and encourage me and pull me up. And to have that responsibility, it's kind of, to me, that's even starting the podcast, it's fun and it's exciting, and it helps to even promote my books and my friend Stephanie Cotta's books, but even other authors that we have on our show, it helps them. But I feel like there's a responsibility to help other people. I feel like I've always loved that. That's kind of always been a part of me, is to be a cheerleader for people and to encourage people. And so to get to do that, it's a privilege, and it's something I get to do. I don't have to do. So I lean into that really strongly. That's an easy thing for me to lean into. And I hope I do inspire others to write. I hope that there are other books that come into this world. I think that a lot of people have this idea and mentality that we're all in competition with each other. But the truth is, there's a really big, wide table, and there's plenty of food for everybody, and for everybody to thrive and to have a gifting and a calling and to feast. and to release their giftings into the world. The more there is, the better. So I like to think of the world that way, and what I have to offer that way also.
Beautiful. Okay, talk us into the books, and what are we going to find? Are all three books, is the story linked across all three? Are they standalone? Give us the history. Let's start with book one and give us some overview to what you've written.
So book one is Eleanor and the Song of the Bard, and it is a trilogy.
Okay.
It's the third book will be a completion of this part of the story.
Okay.
And it is a historical fantasy because, again, I'm a very much as I'm a fantasy nerd, I'm a history nerd too. I get really into history, and that is why my favorite thing is mythology, because it kind of combines the two. You've got mythology that tells you stories that were part of history, but they have elements of fantasy and storytelling in them. And one of my favorite mythologies is Celtic mythology and Arthurian legend. I am a super Arthurian legend nerd, and I will fly that flag really proudly. I will talk about it. If people push that button in me, I will start talking about it and sometimes realize I need to stop. But my books actually start in the premise of after Arthur's death. So if you know anything about Arthurian legend, Arthur dies at the end. And you know, as much as I'm up for a good tragedy, especially sometimes tragedies have a good ring to them that teach you a really good lesson, something about that always really bothered me. I did not love the ending of that story. I felt like there was all this purpose, destiny calling, prophetic words that were being released over Merlin and Arthur, and they didn't all come to pass. They kind of all just, you know, they were done. It got taken away from them, which gave me kind of an idea. What if after Arthur's death, we deal with the issue in the realms of fantasy, the idea of grief and what happens when the worst does come? Can there be hope on the other side? And that's a real strong theme throughout my book. It begins with Merlin, who is a young character in my story. He's not an old man, long white beard, blue pointy hat. He's a younger character, and my Arthurian legend also starts in the 6th century, which means there's no castles, there's no knights. This is an old, rugged time period that would actually be a little bit more historically accurate to the legend. And then I have the twist of time where I kind of get to look through the windows of my new character's eyes. Her name is Eleanor, and she gets to enter into this world kind of through time travel. And there is just fun elements of darkness that's filling the land, and this opportunity to either do something or let the land be swallowed. And Merlin is a main character as much as Eleanor is. So my second book is Merlin and the Magic of Time. And there's dragons, there's unicorns, there's all kinds of mythical creatures mixed in with real true history that happened in the landscape at that time. So I kind of have a fun time kind of creating a legend that for me was almost like, maybe this is what really happened. This is really the landscape. And maybe all of these fantasy creatures that we all call myth and legend were really just being able to see through the veil of the spirit realm. And they weren't just mythical beasts and creatures that lived on the land, but something that could be seen if your eyes were open. So that's kind of how I started the premise of my books. We have a lot of fun returning characters like Guinevere and some of the remaining knights, which of course they wouldn't be knights in my book. They're more Cymru warriors. So Welsh Cymru means I actually learned to speak a level. Don't ask me to speak it. It's too hard, but I did learn to speak a level of Welsh so that I could use some Welsh words in my books and some Welsh sentences here and there for magic purposes. But Cymru means collective or gathering. And so my warriors are called the Cymru, which would be what some of Arthur's remaining mighty men would be called.
Nice. Now, I'm a history guy, so you got me there. And my ancestors are from Scotland. Campbell is our last name. So I have some interesting stories from my past that I know of. We weren't the nicest people, the Campbells, but not a lot of Scottish people liked us back then in the day. So that's always interesting. But when I hear anything historical like that, That piques my interest as a reader. So if there's a history buff like me, what are they going to enjoy the trilogy?
Yeah, I've actually been surprised. I've gotten some really great comments and reviews from people who said I wouldn't have normally picked up a fantasy book, but I picked up this one because of the historical elements in it, and they really enjoyed them. And I even had some people who were like, man, you made me want to actually go on Google and see if some of the things you were saying were true or if you'd made them up. And so I inspired some people to be like, oh my gosh, is this real history? And then they would, lo and behold, find out it was real history. And so that was fun that some people experienced it kind of like a historical treasure hunt because of the mix of fantasy. They were like, what is real? And I love that because that's definitely kind of what I was aiming for in the story. And there's also a level of romance. I would not call my book a romance book. Definitely there is a love story in it. And so if you enjoy a good love story, there's love story intermingled in the action. So
the fun part, I would assume, because I'm not an author, so I'm just here to admire your amazing work. The fun part, I would think, for an author is hiding little things in the story that you ask people, what chapter are you on? Oh, I'm on chapter 3. Oh, wait till you get to chapter 5. Wait till you get there, because I can't tell you, but wait till you get to 5. It all makes sense in 5. And you're like hiding these little nuggets and little things for people to discover. Yes. Does that happen while you're writing, or do you find yourself going back and adding little surprises for your readers? How does that kind of happen for you?
I think it's a little bit of both. I'm one of those people that I definitely had, because that story was just in my mind for so long. I had the beginning to the end already in my mind, but it was more like the bones and not the meat.
Okay.
And as I wrote the book, there were definitely, my characters took over and started telling me how the story was really going to go, so that definitely happened. There's definitely the author insanity that happens where your characters start telling you how the story's going to go. And I found that there were these little gems that would surprise me because my book does have an element of mystery. You don't know what's really going on. You get some clues that lead you to book 2, and they reveal a little bit more clues. So there is kind of that mysterious element. And some of those mysterious elements took me by surprise. But I think some of my favorite treasures, again, because I'm a super history and Arthurian legends fan, was entering in pieces of the Arthurian legend into the story in kind of backstory telling, the way that if you read Arthurian legend, it was really told. A lot of people, they've seen the Disney, The Sword in the Stone, and they kind of have this more medieval idea of King Arthur, but really there's like hundreds of books written about King Arthur, and some of them date way back to like the 3rd and 4th century. And it was fun to kind of get to tell little bits of Arthurian legend. And so people who know Arthurian legend or love it would love my books because it tells you more of the story, and it takes you back and almost tells you elements that you didn't know existed that were part of the, Arthurian legend, like Merlin, being a king at one point. And just a lot of these kind of surprise things that even like twist back into Atlantis and the new people coming to what was Ireland and England at the time. But this was like a, way in the past, old ancient history. So I liked weaving this idea of a world that changed over time and really, really old bits and pieces of Arthurian legend that were, what was it really like for Arthur when he pulled the sword from the stone? Was there a stone? I think one of my favorite things to put in there that most people assume that the sword that Arthur pulled from the stone was Excalibur. But in original Arthurian legend, that was not Excalibur. It was either Euralius or Uther, depending on your version you were reading. It was his sword that Arthur pulled from the stone, that later, while in the midst of battle with the Saxons, it broke. And he no longer had a sword. The sword that claimed him as king, and he wasn't even a king yet, broke and shattered. And it wasn't until he goes to the lake where the Lady of the Lake comes. And there's a lot of different versions of that story too, where he gets Caledfolk, which later becomes Excalibur. And that sword was specifically made for him. And I think it's interesting because the themes, I always love a good theme of a story is, sometimes just because you're given a sword doesn't mean that that sword's meant for you. Because that sword wasn't meant for him.
Mm-hmm.
He had another sword. That was his father's sword. The sword that was meant for him had a greater meaning and a deeper purpose. So those things I love to weave into the book and even bring in some of those ideas of the original story that were actually really, really powerful.
So the book one arrives at your home for the first time. You open the box, open the package. There it is in front of you. For the first time, you get to put hands on it. For your early days before you were an author, could you imagine that day, and what did it feel like to open that box for the first time?
It was quite an amazing moment because even when you're writing it and then you're going through the publishing process, it just seems so far away. It just doesn't seem like it's ever going to be something you're going to hold in your hands. And I remember getting my book for the first time and opening my books, and my kids have been along the journey with me too, and my husband, and just being there with them and opening it and seeing them. And it was quite an amazing moment. It actually took me some days for it all to kind of sink in. I think when I opened it, it was just kind of like, I was numb. You're like, wow, it's actually here. And then days after days, and I would keep the books on my desk for a little while and just be like, look at it. You did it. You wrote this book. You thumb through it. Looks like a legitimate book. I couldn't believe it. Here it is. And I remember one of my favorite things from that moment was we were sitting around the dinner table, and my daughter, she says to me, she goes, and she was younger at the time, so she's probably, 7 or 8. And she goes, Mom, I can do anything. And I said, sure, honey, you can do anything. But, why are you saying that? Why is that coming up? And she goes, well, you said you could write a book and you did it. So if you can write a book, that means that I can do things too.
Wow.
And I was like, again, worth it. Whether anybody ever reads my book, for me to get the book and for my kids to see it, and for them to feel like that meant that they could accomplish something in their life. If, my husband and I always have those conversations, if we can be branches of a tree for our kids to swing on, if we can be, if they can take our ceiling and make it their floor, then we've done a good job.
Wow.
And I think that if storytelling is doing that for my kids, I'm grateful. But that was definitely a big part of when I got my books and I looked at them and I looked at the covers, and I'm just so proud of them. I really am. I can't wait for book 3 to be done and for me to be able to see the whole collection sitting together on my bookshelf with, all 3 titles and all 3 characters.
Amazing. So stick with me on my analogy here for a second, because it might not make sense when I first start talking, but you can buy a mattress in a box and it arrives at your home, and you unzip this box and this thing springs out and gets you right. Okay. So with that in mind, you've unzipped this box as an author now. There's no stuffing this back into the box and putting it away. You're an author.
Yes.
Ta-da, you're an author. So I know book 3, the ink isn't even dry on book 3, but the podcast is called Living the Next Chapter. So how are you living this next chapter? What does the next chapter look like for you? I know you're going to be promoting the books. I get all that. Mm-hmm. But how are you living the next chapter now?
Well, I definitely, again, it's been a pleasant surprise, because for me, I wondered if by the end of this series, this story that had been playing in my head, if I was going to get to keep writing. And I wondered that because I didn't know if I was ever going to have another story to tell, like what I had previously, like now that I've opened that box, like you said, now you can't shove it back in. And now this is something I really want to do. Our idea is going to continue to flow. And yes, is the answer. The closer I got to the end of book 3, the inspiration for new stories started flooding my mind. And I've already got a prequel that I am really excited to write that kind of goes even back into more old for Arthurian legends. So that'll be fun for some people to kind of get more of those bits and bobs. And then I have kind of a paranormal ghost story set in Ireland from an American who is from Chicago. Her family's from Ireland. And then she goes back to Ireland to her family's home. And there's this whole mystery ghost story that kind of unravels with banshees and all that kind of fun stuff, and ghosts. So I'm excited to write those stories and see, you know, where they're going to lead me. And it's exciting to know that I do get to keep writing books. And I have also, you know, like you were talking about encouraging others to write, it's become a huge passion of mine to become a writing coach, and also help people to publish, because there is a way to do it with excellence and to not be hindered, wondering while you're writing. I think that's one of the biggest hindrances for writing, people who are writing books, is what do I do next? Will there ever be a publisher who will accept my work? Because if you look online and look at a lot of what people are doing, you hear this resounding, this is impossible. No one will pick you up. And if they do, you've got too many other people you're competing with. And I just don't believe that. I don't think that's true. And I think if I can be somebody to help people know that there is a way to get there, then it kind of unjostles all that fear and helps them to write the book so that they can get to the place where they're publishing it.
That is spectacular. So are you thinking about creating some kind of course or guide or something for new authors that could come to you and kind of start as a starting process? Is that something in the works too?
Yes, it's in the works. I can't say that it's we're not ready to quite leap off yet. But there are definitely, I'm aspiring to create some online, like 6 weeks to publishing, those kinds of courses, to help people get to publishing. So that is definitely something that I'm beyond just wanting to do. I plan on doing, but it hasn't been created yet. But my coaching, as far as hiring me as a coach, that's happening. But yeah, there's a lot I want to do, even helping people throughout the publishing, being a publishing consultant, things like that. But the bones are there. I haven't built the structure yet. I can tell you, as a creative person having a business, this is new territory for me. This is like, I'm doing it scared kind of thing. Yeah. And I've learned to doing it scared is the best way to do it, because it means you're probably growing and taking leaps into a world that maybe I might surprise myself to discover. So I definitely don't want to resist it, but it is a whole new world for me.
Exciting, because I'm thinking there's authors listening to our conversation going, oh, well, Angela did it, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if I have the talent, the skills, the abilities to do this. But working with you might be the one thing that helps them get past that and to untap that passion and the love for writing. It might be as simple as spending some time with you and just picking up on this. You know, that might be all it takes for somebody.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really easy to get a hold of me, and to find your way into, you know, what I'm offering currently and what will be offered, will all be on my website.
Good. So we'll have links to all that as well. So let's promote that right now. I have another question before we end, but let's promote your website. Let's promote the podcast again. Do the whole thing. You know what to do.
Okay. My website is angelarhughes.com, and on there you will discover all kinds of things about myself and my writing and my books, my nerdiness, as well as how to get a hold of me if you would like a writing coaching session with me, and other things that will be offered here coming up soon. And join the Ink Mages podcast, especially if you love nerdy banter and you like to talk about fantasy, sci-fi, storytelling, your favorite characters from whatever movie or books that you've read. This is going to be discussed on our podcast. And my friend Stephanie Cotta has a fantastic series of books that she is writing as well. And we're really excited to do this together. You can find us on Spotify and on YouTube.
Very good. And let Stephanie know too. I'd love to have her on Living the Next Chapter. I'd like to have that conversation as well, please.
Okay.
So you walk into this Irish cafe, and sitting in the corner is a struggling author. They're lost. They don't know what to do. And that author is you. And now with all the knowledge that you've gained, the insight that you've learned, 3 books now done, you walk over and sit down with you
Hmm.
and you have a conversation, what do you say to that person? A little time travel going on here. But you can sit
That's
down,
my jam.
right? What do you need to tell that person to get them to where you are right now?
Oh gosh, I could get really nerdy on this answer.
Get nerdy. Go.
But the first thing that pops in my mind is, if Frodo had known, that his journey was going to end in throwing a ring into the fire, he would never taken a step out of his door. But he didn't know. He just said yes and started the adventure and started walking out the door. And it turned out, the significance of what he did, saved Middle Earth, okay. So nerdy again, ink mages, if you want nerdy, join me there. But I really would tell myself, like, you really have no idea where you think you're going one way, but there's a really amazing, if you're willing to be brave, thing that you'll discover on the other side that will really free you to be your best self. Because it really has been such an amazing adventure to get to write stories and to be the author of them and for them to be living and breathing. And that's something that I got to do. And I did it scared. Like, I'm doing so many other things. It was worth it. I think I would probably tell myself to stop worrying about what other people think so much, because there's so much that we choose not to do because we're afraid of people not believing in us. And I think that's a huge hindrance. And for me, even back then in Ireland, there were so many things I maybe could have done a lot earlier in my life if I wasn't so afraid of whether or not people believed in me or not. And certainly as I embarked on becoming an author, there were people who didn't. And now they do. Mm-hmm. So learning to convince people comes after you've convinced yourself and you've done the hard work to get there.
When you can turn the doubters into fans, that's a big step. And the one thing, sometimes writing a book is more than just 2 covers, some paper, and some words. It's inspiration. Back to your daughter. Mm-hmm. The fact that she can do anything because you've done what you've done.
Yes.
You've given her hope and inspiration to do anything that she wants to do. That is completely different than sitting down to write a book. You've inspired beyond a page. And so maybe as a writer, it's not always about the book. Sometimes it's about the journey. Sometimes it's about the results. And the fact that you have people in your life cheering you on and you're inspiring them to great things by what you do. Maybe that's your calling. So congratulations on doing all of those things.
Thank you.
You've done them all. So I just want to encourage you to keep going forward.
Thank you.
Keep sharing your story. And there's everyone listening, there's a great set of books you need to add to your library from Angela. And again, all the nerd is included for free in every one of the trilogy books. Completely free nerd with every book purchase. Angela, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. I'm looking forward to having you back on in the future and to talk more about your podcast as well.
Hey, let's go. Yes, I love that.
Awesome. So everyone go check out the show notes, all the information there. Angela knows how to do all these call to action at the end. But also go check out the podcast and add that to your favorites. Like, subscribe, follow, do everything you can for the podcast. And when you buy the books, wherever you get them, make sure you leave a great review as well. And let people know about what Angela's written. Angela, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for checking out Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you here. And here at the end, I want to just put this shout out to authors listening. If you want to sell more books, if you want to build community, one of the best ways you can do that is by guesting on podcasts and or having your own podcast. So I have a podcast called the How to Podcast series, and I help people start podcasts. I also do editing. I also help with social media, website design. I do all those things in addition to being the host of this podcast and these 6 other podcasts that I do, including How to Podcast series. I think you would be the perfect person to start a podcast. I would love to help you. Head over to howtopodcast.ca, howtopodcast.ca, Reach out, let me know if you're interested in starting a podcast, and I want to work with you. Thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. Catch you on the next one. Take care.